Welcome to this special edition of Hashtag Trending. This is your deepfake host, Jim Love. That video? It's a deepfake of me. I did it for free in under an hour for no cost with an iPhone and a web browser. And you might say, a little stilted, but it only gets better from here. That's why this week we have a panel we've shared with our sister podcast, Cybersecurity Today. And while there's a focus on cybersecurity, the overall topic, particularly deepfakes, were particularly suited to the Hashtag Trending audience. I hope you enjoy it. Oh yeah, this is really me. Promise. This week we have a little difference in our panel. We've got some new guests. Marcel Gagné, he's an open source guru and IT veteran. Welcome, Marcel.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Marcel has joined me on Hashtag Trending quite a few times now. We have our regular David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security in beautiful downtown Fredericton.
I am still, yes, in an unusual sort of summer lull, actually still in my home community. That will change very radically in a few weeks when I will be living out of airport lounges once again, but to get to enjoy beautiful Fredericton.
And David's not just our cybersecurity expert, he's also our resident arts and culture advisor. We have a special guest today on our panel, Andréanne Bergeron. She's the Director of Research at Go Secure and an affiliated professor at University of Montreal. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I have a PhD in criminology, so I'm interested in offenders' behavior, attackers' behavior, and more specifically on hackers, malicious hackers, and things like that. I'm interested in their strategies, their decision-making, and the social part of it.
I've had the pleasure of working with Andréanne and her colleagues at Michael Joyce, and we have this world-class cybercriminology group at the University of Montreal. They're also very focused on the human side as well as other technical aspects. It is a gem of a resource in cybersecurity knowledge and expertise here in Canada. And I just want to plant that maple flag we're pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'm just glad we could get somebody smart on the podcast, that's all. Here's our format. I'm going to give you some of the most interesting stories from the past week. We're going to go through a few of those just to get some tidbits, because I want to do a deeper dive into something, and we'll reveal that as we go through. A couple of the news stories that came up for comment. One was the president of CrowdStrike was at DEF CON, and he did something I thought was really amazing. They have an award for the greatest failure of the year. He turned up in person to accept that. David, did you catch that?
I caught bits of it, and I caught some of the follow-on reporting. And so it's called the Pony Award. And so ponage being hacker elite speak for getting hacked or having a bad day. A reminder, CrowdStrike wasn't hacked. This was just a black swan event when it comes to testing and all kinds of fun things going wrong with access to the Windows kernel. But I thought it showed humility for them to show up and acknowledge it and say, we screwed up. And I think that's going to buy them a lot of credibility. Certainly their stock market price continues to be significantly down from when the event happened, to the tune of almost $30 billion in market capitalization. It's starting to recover. I am hearing things in the marketplace relative to some positives in an ironic way. One very large company was like, we didn't realize how big they were, and now we're glad we're working with them. Yeah, they made a mistake, but they're going to learn from this. We'd rather work with someone that's learned from this than maybe someone new that hasn't. Now, the other side of the argument is, did they just give class action lost ammunition that's going to be machine gun back at them? Not a lawyer.
Yeah, I've had that discussion too with people in communications. And you know something? They already have the receipts. And your admission is not going to get you into bigger trouble. I'm absolutely convinced. And again, not a lawyer, but I've got a hunch that they can prove this without them accepting this award. Elon Musk blaming a DDoS attack for what everybody pretty much thinks is a failure of infrastructure in there. Marcel, you're our infrastructure guy. Did you catch the thing on Elon Musk?
I just want to, yes, I did. But I just want to touch on the CrowdStrike thing for a moment before we move away from that one into Elon. I think the cool thing about the CrowdStrike, aside from the fact that nobody knew how insanely big this company was and just how many systems they take care of around the world, it was fascinating. Most of us didn't even know that this company existed and didn't know just how big their reach was. The other thing that I find fascinating is the way that the company handled it, I think, is the way that almost everything like this should be handled. You just admit it. Now, Microsoft, interestingly enough, also pointed to the fact that they were blaming the European Union and their rule. See David shaking his head there.
A 10-year-old rule, and we're getting on it right now.
But we're blaming the European Union for it. So in many ways, I have to give kudos to the people at CrowdStrike, for owning this one, because obviously they screwed up badly. This should have been tested on a limited number of systems as opposed to just rolling it out to the entire world. As for Elon, I used to love Elon. I really did. Many years ago, I thought, this guy is SpaceX, he's Tesla, all these things. I mean, this man is building technology for the future of the world. But needless to say, my opinion has changed over time. I don't think this has anything to do with a DDoS. There's absolutely no evidence that that was the case. They were trying desperately to limit traffic so that they could actually keep this thing going. Trump talks about having 50 or 60 million people online. And I think the max that was expected that they were actually able, or external sources, was something around 1 point. I think it all comes down to the fact I'm trying to save money. I fired all my tech staff because I'm so much smarter than everybody else. And it all fell apart. I mean, you could practically see it coming, but it all fell apart. And that's because he wasn't willing to let the people who knew what they were doing do what they were doing. Instead, he got rid of them.
And I just want to get back to a second about that EU regulation whipping post. I got to call it out. The reason the EU told Microsoft it has to provide access to the kernel is because Microsoft is selling security tools in competition with other vendors. And they were giving themselves a potential technical advantage by nature of their monopoly and control over that, which is unfair from a competitive space. And access to the kernel space, and I'm going to point at the malware expert, Andréanne, for a second here about why we need access to these kinds of things. It's got to be a level playing field. So if Microsoft decides to go to the route of locking everybody out and going the way that Apple's done it, which is providing API access, which has got pros and cons from a stability, but also the creativity and ability to actually go and find threats, et cetera, then it's got to be one rule for everybody, including Microsoft. But Andréanne, you play around with malware. I'm curious if you had any thoughts about the CrowdStrike shenanigans and Microsoft and all that fun stuff.
This whole thing, my take was that when something like this incident happens, companies are really quick to jump in and say, well, it didn't happen to us, we're better. But the truth is that we all breathe a little sigh of relief when we don't have to take that bullet, right? So we talk a lot about the IT failures and cyber attack, and those are big deals, no doubt. So honestly, it doesn't matter much what causes it. These outages will have the same disruptive impact on people and business. So I feel it's not necessary to start on who did what. And the reality is that no matter how big or scale an organization is, no one is immune to these risks. That's why building resilience is so critical, right? So I absolutely love how Michael Centonas accepted the most epic fail award. And he has the exact attitude. There's nothing worse than a company that would pretend that it's not their fault and do not own up to it, because this makes us doubt their capacity to learn from their mistakes. So it's absolutely amazing what he did.
I come from the open source world, and I've been promoting open source. In fact, I'm from the Linux and open source going way, way back. One of the things that I've always appreciated there was the idea that there is a large ecosystem which isn't controlled in a central location. I think that when we create a monolithic monster that's controlled in one single location, you're just inviting disaster at some point. Now, this isn't to say that bad things haven't happened in the open source community either, but the likelihood of it taking down the entire world is much, much less because there are so many different players in the game.
Yeah, I generally agree, Marcel, that I don't like monocultures. And this is something we've talked on in past podcasts in the wake of CrowdStrikes. And then I look at that in nature, right? I come from a province dominated by the forestry industry and how important it is to have a balanced silviculture. That's the fancy word for forestry, and mix of species and things that we're doing. And that applies in the digital space. It's why we need to have a smart look at market regulation and where government plays a role in terms of should one company have X amount of any given critical infrastructure sector, et cetera, so that we can balance these things out. But I would say this, the thing that terrifies me about open source, and I love open source, but it's the freeloading of so many organizations on two guys or two gals in Nebraska or Norway that are maintaining that one package that the entire tech stack actually is built on as a single point of failure that no one took the time to think about. And the fact that we do not contribute back, we take is this is still a take relationship with the open source community. The attackers are figuring out more clever ways. Like Jim, you've covered numerous stories about attacks on Python repositories, about hijacking of open source projects, et cetera. There's a whole different set of security that comes from the open source. And I just think a healthy internet is a mix of decentralized and centralized and has healthy balances of value. And we're not there. We are pillaging the goodwill of software developers for the last 30 years. And someday the bill comes due.
Not going to disagree.
Yeah. Talking about a monoculture or huge monolithic structure that's bound to fail. Another story hit me, and it just the gift that keeps on giving in terms of news, or the disaster that keeps on taking. The national public data, which I think rivals Yahoo. You said this, David, for the largest hack in history. Yahoo finally owned up to about national public data is 2.9 billion. I think we'll call it a draw. But it turns out this week they revealed that they also had most of the social insurance numbers, or social security, we call them social insurance numbers in Canada, social security numbers in the US, in that huge data store that people had neither approved nor given consent for. Hey, Andréanne, this is something I think you must see in research. These big data stores are just set to be attacked. Did you follow that story at all?
Yeah. So if we're talking about research, before the National Public Data incident, research showed that nearly half of Americans have experienced some sort of identity theft, right? Half of them. So it's really high. Even before this last incident, it's becoming a norm to have your data out there. So with so much data floating around, your personal data is likely to get targeted or noticed by hackers. It's like being hidden in a huge crowd. So your information is just one piece in an ocean of data. It makes you less of an immediate target, but it's still a problem. But I am a fan of going back to certain old ways of doing things. What will happen? Like we will have to go to the bank in person to get identified when it's a question of credit card or buying a house.
I'm curious about what you just said there, because I have been thinking for a long time about the idea that we actually do need a different type of identification. I mean, the legal ramifications, and I suppose the social ramifications of which are yet to be determined. But I feel like in a world that is increasingly connected, where everyone is going to be living a huge portion of their lives online. And I know what you're saying, go do things in person. I'm one of the people that thinks that if only for people's mental health, it would be good to go back into the office. But I also feel like every single person in the world should be assigned some kind of digital identification at birth these days. There should be a way to know who it is. There should be a way to know who it is that is actually representing themselves. And there should be only one way, certainly from a legal perspective, of identifying an individual. There shouldn't be like a gazillion pieces of information that can track back to me as an individual. There should be one thing that I'm in control of and nothing else. Like it's kind of like a universal passport or a universal social insurance number, because we sure as heck don't want a social security number. Thoughts?
So I just want to build on that. Estonia led the world in the development of digital citizenship. And so they created a cryptographically robust, I'm not going to say perfectly secure, because there have been flaws found in various things. And I still remain committed to the fallacy that we can never have a perfectly secure thing. But they created a modern, unique citizen digital identifier, Marcel, exactly like you described. And they yielded significant benefits from this. And I am personally in favor of government issuing digital credentials of identity as a public good. We do not outsource passports and driver's licenses to banks and telecommunications companies, because that's an important part of our society as a democratic process and accountability and other things. That matters. It is a public good. There are two major problems right now that are going to hold us back, particularly in Canada and the United States, when it comes to doing this. And the first is technical debt. And so when we look at the enormity of the technical debt that relies on the social insurance number and the almost Herculean task of unwinding all of these things or trying to replace them. I mean, for God's sakes, we tried to do a payroll system for federal employees, and that was like a disaster and a half, affecting a lot of people in deeply ways. But they're supposed to now try and figure out this, which is Sisyphean in sort of its staggering nature and how difficult it's going to be. And yet it's absolutely imperative for what's coming next. The other part, however, isn't just the technical challenge. It is all of these data breaches that Andréanne points out. There is a cumulative social capital cost to the mess we've created in that people don't trust. And so this idea of a powerful, unique identifier that could then be used or weaponized against the individual, even to the point of like the QAnon kind of folks saying this is some vast government conspiracy, number of the beast kind of shenanigans. That is enough to scare politicians that live on the thinnest wedges from ever touching these issues. But they're so essential. I'm not smart enough to say I have a solution to either of those two problems, but they are the crux of how we get out of the mess that we're in.
Andréanne, and it may not be research that you've seen, but that this whole idea of resistance to a better form of identification, a social security number, that's 100 years old. Matter of fact, one of the things that happen is people who haven't got online banking are more exposed because now somebody can take that social security number and set up an online banking. So they're actually worse off. But is there any research that you've encountered about why we have such a resistance to moving forward and accepting a better form of identification?
I think it's just a lack of solution or idea to go further because, like, how technology is, right? Every time we go with a new technology and it's revolutionary and it really gets to the problem and everything, it will be vulnerable at some point in the future. So even if we develop this amazing technology and give identification to people at birth, in 20 years, it will be breached somehow. So it's just how technology works, right? It comes with its law of consequences. So I'm not sure. I don't have solution either. And I don't see right now in the research field, real solution that first attack the problem.
I think that's the
Also,
researcher's equivalent of get over it. This is just going to be a problem.
yeah, it is. Well, it is already a problem, right? But no solution are there yet. And I'm not sure we will find one. It's a bigger problem than we are, actually.
But it is an infrastructure problem. And we tend to think of technological things like this, particularly when it comes to identification. Identification has been the thing that we've been trying to figure out online since we've all gotten online. It is a question of infrastructure in the same way that pipes bringing water into a city is an infrastructure thing. Yes, it's true that there will be things that open it up to abuse or there will be flaws found in the system. But as with any system of infrastructure, you have to maintain that infrastructure. And you have to be willing to understand that, yes, there will be kinks. Yes, there will be cracks. But we have to fix those kinks and those cracks as we go along, not wait until they break and then fix them at that point. It's got to be part of how we do everything and everything we do without just letting it go to rot. It takes a long time, and it would take a long time to develop a system like that, but there's no reason in my mind that it couldn't be done, politics aside.
Yeah, no, I think inertia is a hell of a force to overcome. And so getting out of the mess that we're in, there's two things, and God help me, this is one of the few times you'll ever hear the following sentence come out of my mouth. This might actually be a use case for blockchain. Whew, that actually hurt to say, like I'm going to have to take some mouthwash. But where I actually saw was a theoretical idea where different forms of different digital attestations from different providers combined together could actually give you that higher. So like in this theoretical model, and it was modeled around a digital passport was the concept. You could have this government issue identifier and it'd be weighted very heavily, but you can also have online provider. So your bank account, your telecommunications account, your other things all rolled up. And as you added attestations into your credential, the stronger and more reliable it was and the more control. I thought that concept was interesting, but again, massive compute, massively complex. Are there better ways to do this? Does it require blockchain? God, I hope not. But maybe it is the actual one use case. But the other flip side of this is a different concept. And I probably won't do it full justice, but Tim Berners-Lee, who I think has the title as the father of the internet, which I think he wears with like mixed feelings about the good and the bad. It's like being a parent of multiple children, some of whom go on and get their PhD and other of whom are in jail. And you're like, I have mixed feelings about my children. And so he's got this concept of what they call pods. And so this is the idea that a single personally controlled repository of your information and that websites, online services, et cetera, would request access to the pod. This would be very much, Marcel, in a decentralized model. So no longer giant databases like National Public Data and others who can collect and own this without consent. You would actually have to get truly informed consent and only access the data to which the person consented from their pod. Can we turn the dial back and go back to a decentralized internet? And is that way of getting around government inertia, the technical debt, the political debt? I don't know.
I was about to say, like, encryption on the user end might also be part of the solution. Like, when no one in between have the information, only you can confirm that it's you, like on your end. So there's no third party in between, right? This might also be part, maybe along with the blockchain thing.
We're going to get David a t-shirt now. I said nice things about blockchain. Of getting to identity came up this week. And Andréanne, you pointed it out. There's always going to be something new. And here's something new. Deepfakes. We were discussing last week about how North Korean hackers had fooled North American companies. And David said, did they do no interviews? Well, it turns out they may have been using deepfakes to actually establish identities, as well as having this farm of laptops that could be controlled remotely. But they could also possibly pass these interviews using deepfakes. At DEF CON, they did a demo. And I don't know if you've been following this. I know Marcel's been doing some research into this, but 2 months ago, 100 years ago in AI time, it took you like 3 to 4 days to get a pretty rudimentary representation of yourself. It was pretty good. You could do a deep fake of yourself. And people were listening to voice deep fakes and things like that. Over the past couple of weeks, some new stuff has been released from HeyGen, from, there's been some examples coming out of OpenAI. We are now at that tsunami phase in terms of what people can be able to do to fake identities. Marcel, you've been following this. Do you agree with me?
I do, but go back in time a little bit, just briefly, 100 years or so. Deepfakes have been around for a long time. We've been doctoring images and making things appear that didn't actually happen for a long, long time. We've just gone to a new technological level. Andréanne, University of Montreal, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a project that came out of the university, which was called Lyrabird, Lyrabird, if I remember correctly. It has since faded into the background, but it was notable at the time because with a 30-second sample of a person's voice, you could have them say another 30 seconds of something completely different that they hadn't said. And this was like 6, 7 years ago. What we've done recently is we've taken this to a whole new level because the technology obviously keeps improving. We have access to updated artificial intelligence models that can respond pretty much instantly. I've done a lot of playing around with 11 Labs. There is a product called play.ht, play.ht, which I've used as well, which I actually think in some ways works better than that, where I've taken samples from a whole bunch of people. I'm not doing these things publicly. I'm doing it for fun. But I've sent birthday greetings to my family from Justin Trudeau or Barack Obama because it is so incredibly easy to do these things. There are, of course, also technologies that let you clone your face, for instance. The DEF CON thing is interesting because they did it on a very specific set of models at DEF CON. I think you sent me a story, or you sent us all a story, which talked about the idea that deepfakes are getting easier, but they're also easier to catch. But they were easier to catch in a very specific set of environments, as a very specific training set that they were working with. And now, of course, there are a gazillion of these pieces of software that are out there that can do things like HeyGen, Synthesia. All these sites are able to create digital people. And I've done that even with myself. Like if you go to HeyGen, it's one of the ones that you can freely have. Basically, you record a video of yourself, which is about 30 seconds long. And then all of a sudden you have a video avatar of yourself that will say whatever you want. And of course, that means that if you have access to this technology, one of the dangers there is, of course, this stuff is freely available. So yes, I accept that there are downsides to open source as well. what that means is that you don't actually need secret hacker cabals in North Korea or anything like that. Just some schmuck in their basement who has a laptop like mine, which has an NVIDIA 1660 Ti, is more than enough to take anyone's video image, recreate that video image, and then make it do whatever you want. And those things are available commercially. And I'm not sure how much control there is over that. Like, for instance, I mentioned 11 Labs, Play HT, and other things like that. All they do is they say, please tell us that you actually have permission of the person who you're cloning to clone. And it's like, what is this, a legal document or something? It's, oh yeah, totally. I absolutely have permission to clone this person's face, and away you go.
It's yeah, the digital equivalent of a pinky swear.
It's become so much easier, and the open source tools make it possible for basically anyone to do that. But there are a whole pile of commercial services, and they pop up every other day online where you can go on, you can create an account, and they'll let you create a 30-second or 60-second video, and they don't even charge you for that. So here we go again with whether you have identifiable information, Andréanne. Pretend to be somebody else, or you get yourself an account on Proton Mail or something like that. And then you can create a 30 to 60-second video and then just disappear from there. You just use the services that are already out there. I think when we were chatting in email, Andréanne, I think you said, so, was it you that mentioned the idea of having a safe word?
Well, in the article, they talk a lot about that, right?
Oh, okay.
Like, this is what media loves. Like, they love the grandpa and grandma fraud. Like, this is what they talk about the most, right? And, this is obviously to scare people, as usual. Media are really good with that. But criminals are not exactly tech geniuses. So they need cutting edge technology that's simple enough for, say, my mom to use before it becomes a widespread issue. You know what I mean? So, and those stories about grandpa getting the call from their grandchild asking for money, those are not, I don't see that in any research. Those are all anecdotal stories. So before I get into this subject, I need to see research. I need to be convinced, right? But where I think the real problem is, and you mentioned it, the real concern seems to be more at the political and business level. So that's where deepfake could really do some damage, especially when we're talking about matter of warfare and high-stake business deals, because the offender in those situations are the ones with time and money resources and to use like the cutting edge technology.
And cutting edge technology is readily available, and it's available for you to sign on with just an email address on any of these sites. A little video where I compared Synthesia, HeyGen, and I'm trying to remember one other one. It was incredibly easy to do this. I had ChatGPT generate me paragraph wrestling, which I have no interest in, just for the record, but I used that as an example. And I created 3 different avatars that look absolutely perfectly human talking about these things. And you don't need technical expertise anymore. You just need to connect to the right website. That's it.
So the first big media story about the potential use of deepfakes, and by that I mean in real time, having conversation, responding back, was the story of a Hong Kong business email compromise wire transfer, where an employee of a company got on a call supposedly with people of the organization, they say, and were received sort of pressure and orders to transfer this money to this particular account. Now, my concern about trying to figure this out, from this goes to Andréanne's point about the ease of use of this, is that, Marcel, well, tools exist to do asynchronous deepfakes. So you can create and generate a video based on content, and it's kind of, for lack of a better word, static. It's not interactive deepfake. Interactive deepfake in live conversation through a commercially available Microsoft Teams, Zoom, etc., I think is much harder. I'm not saying impossible, because as Andréanne, I think you called it the law of consequences. And oh my God, am I ever going to adopt that as my new maxim for tech? Is that every tech has equal and opposite benefits and costs or risks. So Marcel, to your point, I do think it is an issue. When I think about the ways that organizations make themselves resilient to this type of thing, it comes back to, what kind of assertiveness culture do you have in your organization? How do you communicate what material transfers actually require for proof, for authentication to actually authorize to do things? And how are people able to slow down or challenge things when it is a material amount of money that's at risk? The other thing I'll add, in addition to sort of the culture stuff, is we tend to always go to the latest, sexiest stuff, right? So the grandparent scam and the kidnapping scam against that woman in Colorado and other things. I mean, these things just, the head whips around, right? It's ingrained in humans because it's our danger part of our brain going, new novel things. It's right. I'm going to focus on this. I didn't know this before. Is it going to keep me alive? But old and slow continues to dominate the cybercrime business. Man, phishing emails are still king of the pile, right? So am I going to spend the time, effort to do a deep fake when a fish will do? I think we still got a long way on some of these issues. I think it's good to be ahead thinking like this is coming and it has big consequences. But oh my God, the amount of companies that forget the basics and just rush to the next new thing. And I'll own this for a second because security vendors hype them on the next new thing to sell them the next new thing to defend against. But we still haven't fixed the old stuff.
Well, the old stuff is us. The old stuff is, no, seriously, the old stuff is us. I mean, how many people would dare to question the boss when he shows up on camera? Like, you don't do that crap because your job depends on it. And it is so easy to believe the first thing that you hear. All the greatest quotes in the world are attributed to Mark Twain, of course, because whether he did it or not, but there's the one about a lie will travel halfway around the world before the truth is finished putting on its shoes. People hear something and they immediately accept it to be true because in many ways, it's better to trust the information that's in front of your eyes than to question it, because questioning it might mean, was that really a tiger that was hiding in the bushes? Well, it's best to just assume it's a tiger and move on. It's not just about the security practices at offices. In some ways, we almost have to figure out a way to hack human beings in such a way that they don't automatically react to messages that sound like a person or that look like a particular person. The tool that got mentioned in one of the articles that does real-time stuff, there's much more lightweight versions of that. One I tried a couple of years ago, it's just a little Windows program that you install. You take an image, any image, whether it's the Mona Lisa, Elon Musk, and that becomes your webcam image and it moves with you and it follows your head movement and stuff like this. It doesn't take a lot to fool people. We all like to think that we're insanely, incredibly smart, but God knows, like every one of us here, I'm sure will admit to having read a story and gone, well, that's terrible, long before you find out that it was just all BS.
This is why it's so important that when we look at these issues, and I do agree, it comes back to being our humanity, we actually have to think about biology. We have to think about neuroscience. We have to think about psychology. We have to think about emotional intelligence, and you have to think about culture. None of which I will say that the tech industry does a terrible good job at doing positive things with. Negative things, hi, Facebook, Twitter, algorithms, abusing psychology, testing on teenage girls for unethical reasons, but actually spending the time, the hard work, because we just want antivirus for deepfakes. We want some vendor to come out and say, I've got the latest algorithm. You just install this in your browser and it's going to put a little symbol up that says, nope, it's a deepfake. And you can just do it.
And that's not going to happen any more than antivirus packages have been able to stop things. I'm going to make a really, really scary statement here. And I'm going to say that all of this is good. The deep fakes are good, the visual deep fakes, the fake images, AI, which occasionally gives us the wrong information. All of these things are good because it is actually finally, I think it's happening so fast. We've had security issues forever, and we sort of respond to them when it may affect our stock price. Well, maybe we go out and we actually admit that something happened, or we try to spin the story or something like this. But all these developments are coming so fast and furious, partly because modern artificial intelligence is able to drive these developments increasingly fast, the law of accelerating returns and all that stuff. We're forced finally to face all of this stuff. And I think that if we manage to survive this particular phase of social engineering, we might become a much more robust society because there isn't a person alive that at some point isn't going to have to face the fact that maybe the information that you're getting isn't real. But if suddenly have to accept the possibility that everything needs to be questioned, and maybe that'll slow us down a little bit. Andréanne talked about the idea of the old ways forced you to slow down. You meet in person, you write something. Well, maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe we're speeding up so fast that now we're going to have to slow down when we take in information. And that might not be such a bad thing.
Now, before we get to the youngest person in the room telling us about how we should go back to older ways, which is a little ironic, it seems to me, Andréanne, that this is not the first time. Researchers must confront this all the time. Even before deepfakes, there was a lot of research that appears to be good. And how do we develop the mindset of a researcher that can help sort out the BS from the real?
Yeah, so what Marcel is referring to is critical thinking, right? And critical thinking is not given to everybody, but education is the key for that. And I agree with Marcel on that. We should push that through education. So we talk about misinformation, disinformation, and this is the only solution I see. We have to make people think twice about the information and be critic about it.
I think as part of that, there's this great TEDx talk, and it's called Monkeynomics. And the researcher was exploring whether we're hardwired to make bad financial decisions. So they did this really cool experiment with some monkeys, and they created a monkey economy with tokens, and you gave the tokens, you get a certain amount of bananas. Turns out they did make the same kind of bad, irrational choices that we often see humans make, which led to the hypothesis being confirmed that we are biologically wired to make irrational decisions. You can then work around it. You build those compensating systems and critical thinking skills. But I think we have to get back to telling people, hey, being human is amazing. Like, as much as this weird fetish of this false idol of artificial intelligence, which is a fraction of the power of the dumbest human on the planet. I'm going to reiterate this just one more time. An AI, the $100 million AI from OpenAI and all these roads, is less capable than a 5-year-old child. When you think about the ability to learn new things, to do things, that human intelligence and creativity is still by far ahead of all this. So we need to celebrate that, but we also need to recognize the beautiful flaws that it is to be human. And I think that's where security awareness needs to get beyond yelling at people about passwords and clicking on links and patching devices. These things are important messages, but actually spending time and saying, this is how you're wired. And this is why it's important to make good choices.
Knowing that you're wired that way, to me, says that we need systems that, and again, we're back to systems here. Some of these systems may be legal systems, like the ID system that I was talking about. Knowing that people are wired that way, we have to protect people from their poor wiring. And I know it sounds terrible. It almost sounds like I'm bringing in the nanny state and stuff like this, but people are going to make dumb choices. And because of that, we have to acknowledge that people are going to make dumb choices. And this is why we want to put guardrails on artificial intelligence systems to make sure that they don't let people do harmful things, for the very reason that we know that people are going to do harmful things.
I think we have to have balance, just like it's good to have all these driver assistance systems, the lane assist and the blind spot and the backup cameras are all good things, but they do not replace a well-educated defensive driver understanding their limitations and how to be a good driver. I think if you combine both systems and you create processes like the rules of the road and other things and the things you talked about, Marcel, but I think it also means, hey, you know what the greatest thing that we saw in driving safety in New Brunswick? Graduated licensing. How we dealt with young people who sometimes make bad decisions and very fast, dangerous, lethal, multi-ton moving vehicles. And we balance that. We had driver education and we had systems and processes and we eased people into this. But we're talking about making fundamental changes to people who have been running and gunning with technology. We're literally doing the equivalent of trying to bring law and order to the Wild West at a scale that we've never done as a species. And in some ways, I think you gave me a little bit of hope in a weird sort of dystopian way about this crucible you described, of maybe like everything going to shit is the best thing that could possibly happen to us because we're going to come out of this evolutionary process either alive, better, or not. It's a theory, and you're probably right. But at the same time, like, you just wish it didn't have to be that way. So
No.
you're probably right.
Before we wrap up, because I don't want to leave the audience with sort of the whole idea of, well, go think better or something. I'll ask you for some things that people could actually be thinking about. I'm going to disagree with you, David. Right now, you got to watch it. AI is a 5-year-old child. No doubt about it. Maybe a public school child intelligence. The next release that will be coming out over the next 8 weeks will be a high school student, a very intelligent high school student. After that, a PhD. And the reasoning and learning pieces of it that are defeat it now and make it seem stupid will evaporate. There's no doubt in this that it's going to do nothing but get better. It can outsmart us, and it can already outsmart us. Given that, and I'm going to quote the
I
great
agree.
Canadian philosopher, Randy Bachman, but baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. What should corporate people be thinking right now? The people who are doing the jobs in IT and in management, what should we be doing right now to get, if not ahead of this, at least be able to cope with it?
Well, I reserve the right to continue to debate this issue and not cede the point, but I will cite why I feel this is Jeff Hawkins' book, Thousand Brains, Thousand Minds. And I think the things that give us our creativity, the old brain, amygdala, the core of what it is to be human. It's not just about, right now we're seeing artificial intelligence try and copy the neocortex, the easier part of what it is to be human and the neural networks that it can understand. But it hasn't figured out the primal desires, the why that drives us as humans. And we still have the edge on that side. And I do think that, and I would call this Shipley's law, that there is actually a curve of energy consumption and how much of this dystopian stochastic parrot will actually drive for value. And I will put my $100 on it that DALL-E still generates the creepiest images I have ever seen in my life with human abnormalities. And it does that even after it's just trying to copy what we already do. So I am still pro-human. But I think to your point, what do people need to do? They need to understand that the tools that exist today are a risk, that are good enough to cause pain and problems. And people need to think critically and build those skills into your security awareness program, I think is the best thing. And I tell you, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and assertiveness training courses are the best things organizations can do to defeat business email compromise in the next year.
And Andréanne, before your next PhD student that you're mentoring comes in with Shipley's Law as part of their thesis, what is there research we could be looking at or things we could be looking at that would help us prepare for what's coming at us? In terms of critical thinking, this is something you study, this is something you've done. What are the keys that when you see a student and you're trying to get them to say, you need to think critically, what could we take from what we know in academia to our corporate life?
That's a really good question. And I'll say the only thing that comes to mind is practice. So, awareness program, as David mentioned, and the experience and practice. Being a human helps a lot with that. So I'm not expecting AI to be able to do that. Critical thinking is something else. But yeah, the key is like in practice and in education.
And Marcel, before you and David duke it out on the AI front here, I'm going to see it. It's going to be the thriller in Manila. We'll have Gagné versus Shipley on the AI thing. I'm going to give you the semi-last word. I will prepare you for the fact nobody gets the last word on Shipley's.
All right, listen, I'm sorry, I must disagree. I think artificial intelligence systems, especially frontier systems, are much further ahead than you think they are or that you're willing to accept that they are. To quote somebody else whose work I'm rather fond of these days, the AI system that you're using today is the worst AI system that you will ever use. As Jim said, it is only going to get better. These systems, especially the most advanced systems, can already outthink us. The fact that there are issues with hallucinations, with occasionally getting the wrong answers, with critical thinking, reasoning, whatever you want, is a wonderful little position that we shouldn't get too comfortable with because these things continue to improve. And human beings have a bad habit of going, well, see, a computer will never be able to beat a human being at chess. Oh my God, it beat a human. Well, yeah, well, that's because chess is really just mathematical moves and so forth. Now, a machine will never be able to beat a machine beat a human being and go, well, okay, what about 5x5 games like Dota or something like that? An artificial intelligence. Oh, we crossed that line as well. Hans Moravec, a computer and robotics pioneer from way back, had this little picture that he talked about the idea of the rising tide of technology. And we have at the bottom, we have all these things that machines and computers and robots will never be able to do. And the tide rises and people just point to the next thing that's on the horizon and say, well, obviously, machine could do that, but that's because blah, blah, blah. But the machine will never be able to do these things. The machines are going to be able to do these things, and they are going to get better, and they are continuing to get better. And it's like saying that Moore's law was just a thing that somebody said. The things are increasingly getting better, and we can't ignore that. We can say, yeah, we're human beings, we're amazing, we're incredible, but nothing says that we're the top of the evolutionary pyramid. Not even here on Earth, never mind the rest of the cosmos. But I appreciate you being on Team Human. And honestly, I swear to God, I'm on Team Human as well, but I'm not buying it.
Well, I would say this is the flaw with thinking about the ways of measuring artificial intelligence based on one static test. We mentioned, okay, they can get does it go? And then we move the needle and we say it's chest, whatever. The point of a 5-year-old analogy, the 5-year-old child, is the ability and the scale and the energy required to learn something new. When you think about that 5-year-old child and that biological system, and when you think about the 100 million and the energy required to do an AI, and this is why the Moore's law analogy still holds for me about human beings being infinitely more capable than anything that's even on the paper right now, is that our ability to deliver amazing critical thought on a per energy unit basis is not matched by any of the false gods we have. But let's continue the debate.
And that is, this is phishing on steroids at the least. And there are things that people should be putting in their programs. And I think that that is an important thing that we should be leaving people with, is if we take the model and we say that this has been done before, Marcel said that, and Andréanne said that, what could we be doing in a corporate sense right now, at least to cope?
What I would say about this, and this is the core of being human, is emotional intelligence, listening to your gut, using critical thinking. These are the edges we still have. For how long? Subject of vociferous debate, but they exist today. And so building a culture where you teach people to slow down, this has been our most successful thing in phishing, is when we teach people to slow down, engage the neocortex, think critically, and listen to how their body is reacting to things, they are able to cut down their susceptibility to phishing by 50. And I would argue that is a good starting point for dealing with deepfakes.
And technically, Marcel, Andréanne talked about this, was having possession of our own keys. Is there a technical way we could be looking at having possession of our own identity so that we could make sure that we could authenticate messages?
I think we're back to this idea that there has to be some core way to identify a human being as that person, which doesn't mean, by the way, that you couldn't have alternates, but those alternates, and I think David suggested this with the blockchain, that those alternates could nevertheless be you as well. In other words, it still filters back down to an individual. Having end-to-end encryption is a good start. Having the key that is yours is a good start. But all of those things require a level of technical knowledge that really demands that anyone who uses the internet, that uses these connected systems, be tech savvy to the point that they can take advantage of these things. I think we need to protect people. And this is one of those places where governments are, despite the fact that they may not like the idea, are ideally suited to set up those protections in the first place by giving us those core identities that we can build on top of using David's blockchain.
I'm going to rue the day I ever mentioned this.
You will. Andréanne, I want to leave you the last word. We're going to actually give you the last word because you're our guest. And that is, as an academic and a researcher, if you were giving advice to somebody, because you pointed it out, there's all this noise in the press, there's all these things. How do you distinguish truth from the nonsense that's out there? What are the things that you look to help people identify? Because there's a lot of hype in this, and maybe even some in this show. How do we sort that out and find out what's the things that we should be paying attention to?
I don't have the ultimate response, but one good starting point is the fact that when the news or the information that is in front of you makes you react a lot, well, it probably gets to the target of this information, right? So be careful. When it makes you react, maybe you should think twice.
I think that's the best advice we've heard. I realize we didn't get to the answers. I hope that we would start a discussion, and we're going to do more of these. I want to do a whole program on AI and where that's going. And maybe we'll watch David and Marcel duke it out. That'd be great. But I did want to get us started thinking about this, because regardless of where you are in the continuum, this is something that will be coming at you. People will be asking in the same way that they asked about, do you have an AI strategy? They're going to be coming to you and saying, deep fakes, what do we do? So hopefully we've at least given you a start. We will post some links from the panelists to dig a little deeper, and we'll get you started. If that's all we've accomplished in this podcast, I'm a happy man. I want to thank my panel, Marcel Gagné, open source guru and IT veteran. Thank you, Marcel. It's always great having you.
Thank you.
David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security in Fredericton.
Thank you for the chance. And Marcel, I enjoyed our debate. And Andréanne, I'm super jealous of being an academic, and someday I have to go chase that PhD.
Not only our culture critic, but now our blockchain advisor in here. And so great to have you. I want to inform our audience, we dropped this on you at the last second, and she came in gamely to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thanks to you, our listeners, for spending part of your weekend with us. I'll be back at the news desk on Monday morning. I'm your host, Jim Love. This is your Deepfake host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.